And Emerald has put together a list of media contacts in the area, which I'm sure she'll share with you at some point. So whatever you're working on, environmental issues or whatever, this is a good way to send out a press release or information to various media groups. If you're doing an event, public service announcements, or whatever. I've been studying media for 20 years as part of what I do, Sociology of Media, and was involved with Project Censored at Sonoma State University. It's now global. There's 20 universities involved, and the rector is at Apple Valley College, Mickey Huff. And we put out an annual book every year called Censored. This is called Dispatches from the Media Revolution. We used to call it The News That Didn't Make the News. And it's the most important news stories that corporate media doesn't cover. So if anything, I've had 20 years experience criticizing corporate media and being able to, point out to them that they're errors. If I say them, it was actually, in terms of numbers of corporate media, it's less than 10 that most of us see, and their board of directors is, put them all together, they could probably have a cocktail party in this room. There's not that many of them. They're just a little over 100, and they are they are the corporate 1%, to use an occupied term, and that's probably one of the most successful things that Occupy has done since it started, was to be able to put this 99 and 1% understanding inside of the public. And plus it trained a whole lot of folks on how to do assembly, very democratic assembly decision making. And that's very grassroots. And it certainly upset the 1%, because Occupy has been dismissed by the corporate media, denigrated in many cases, and but it's still very active across the country in a variety of places with people. But a new awareness has come forward. So identifying that there are people who are 1% of the world, their net worth is worth over $700,000. But that's the bottom end. 700,000 puts you in the 1%. That's all. But within that 1%, it's the 1,000th of 1%. The 6,000 to 7,000 individuals that are the super elite. And that's where your 1,500 billionaires are. That's where we just finished a study called the financial core of the transnational corporate class. So these are the corporations of the world, the banks of the world, the most centralized corporations. And we've identified them. They'll be out in the Censored 2014 book, who these people are. 163 individuals control the top 13 centralized banks, the most centralized corporation in the world. They're all banks and money management firms. They control, those 163 people control $24 trillion worth of wealth.
Are you going to list them by name?
Yeah, we list them by name. Everybody's name, who they are, and there's bohemians, and there's trilateralists, and I mean, we just went out, and said this is who they are. And this is who NATO, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, Davos, this is who they serve, is protection of centralized capital in the world and let it go and be able to go anywhere they want. But I didn't come here to talk about that, but I had to talk about our most recent we handed out a number of flyers that, the first, this is all on the internet. And so if you just put the title in, you can find it, there's even more there. So I just went out and got the 8 steps to writing a great press release. And Bob can help me with this, but every press release has the name of the person to contact for the information, usually at the bottom, but not always, sometimes at the top. The person's title and position, their phone number, their email address. There should be the date, the city where the news is occurring. And then a headline that should be, you want to try to get a headline that's punchy or grabby or that will intrigue. Maybe something different. There's a creativity to this. Press releases are boilerplate, but the art of public relations and media is something that's creative, and there's no absolute correct way to do it. So I think that's kind of really important to think about. So if you were going to put out some, Occupy challenges the global 1%. Or some, just something that's very specific, if you're doing a press release around that. You want to avoid jargon that's, acronyms and language that people won't necessarily identify with or know right away. You want to get to the point very quickly. That's the first paragraph of your press release. What are you doing? We're organizing a march. When's your march?
October 12th, 2
And
p.m., City Hall,
right. So, but you want
Santa
to
Rosa
be
City
very
Hall.
specific. What's the main point of the march?
to stop GMOs.
Stop.
GMOs.
Okay. Genetically modified organisms.
Yes.
GMO. Most people know that, but it's still okay to say genetically modified organisms, so people know exactly.
We always remember that as an afterthought, but you're right.
Yeah.
Common mistake.
And you always, of course, will include a link to the website or any social media things that you have in terms of that. And then, of course, you want to answer the question, why is this news? Why do people want to know about this? And this is where you can, the next part is included in that is to quote an expert. So you want to find, it could be a biologist from Sonoma State, it could be anybody who's an expert author of such and such a book on GMOs, says that they are dangerous to all of our health and that. And you could even have a fact that GMOs fed to rats over an 8-week, they'll all develop tumors. You could have facts like that. But not a lot, just enough to sort of titillate and get people kind of interested. And it has to be very accurate. So, if you're going to cite a study, cite quote from a person, it could be somebody in your own group who's perhaps known or has written or been involved. And then right at the end is just who we are, who the organization is, and the contact information. It's not hard. It's pretty straightforward. And then you can send it to everybody in your list. But you want to kind of develop relationships with people inside of the various media organizations. So phoning them doesn't hurt. And I asked Bob to come along because he spent a long time in the PD. And kind of like, well, what happens when a press release shows up? How do people deal with that?
A lot of things can happen to it, and oftentimes that means nothing. And it's you have to understand that your press release is probably one of, well, in the old days, before electronic media, scores and scores of press releases would come in. The mail would bring it in, every day there'd be a press release about something. So you're really competing for the energy and the time of the people whose job it is to decide what they're going to deal with today or tomorrow. So it's a very tough, a very large field that you're entering, and so you have to have a good press release. You want to figure out how to send it to the best person. I saw some of the names on your list, and there's some people there that I wouldn't send a press release to. One of them is no longer at the paper, so you don't have to worry about it. But I find that for me, I was a reporter most of my years, but I also was an editor and manager and all that kind of awful work. But I find that the best place to send a press release is to a reporter, because they're in the business of wanting to write something that's fun and interesting. Editors are oftentimes oppressors, and that's just how I found it. And I find that it's very successful send to a reporter who you know and trust, and can call and say, well, if you can't do it, guy, who else do you think, okay, I'll try Martin Espinosa, whose name you do have. Martin's a good guy. But that's, hopefully if your release gets to an editor or a reporter who says, hey, this is something we should look at or go to or something, then at the bottom of it you'll have, for more information, contact Peter Phillips at Sonoma State University, 664 something, and or you can also attach sometimes a fact sheet, a little more detail, that doesn't slow someone down when they're just trying to find out from your press release what's happening. But if they're interested, they can turn to it and say, oh, I see, they're saving the world. Well, that sounds like, what do they think we covered? Things like that. But anyway, that's just the paper, a paper. I'm sorry, I'll be quiet now.
Well, let's
Take questions, or hold them to the end.
No, let's have conversation. If you got a question, let's bring it
How
up.
would you research, what report to do for what cause and all that stuff?
Well, if you read the paper,
Mhm.
you got to pay attention to bylines. And oftentimes, almost every paper now has a website, of course. And on the website in most papers, and they're sometimes easier to find than others, you got a staff list. And it may even identify what that reporter does for that paper. So that's a way of beginning to understand who does what where. In most cases, this paper here, the Press Democrat, it's a small paper. And its staff is much smaller than it has been. 20 years ago, it had 100,000 circulation. Now it's about 55,000 circulation and falling. So, and the numbers of people putting out the paper has decreased as revenues decrease. So you have a limited number of people. So a lot of reporters will do many, many things. I see where your press list, your media list has Paul Payne as a government kind of guy. Well, he's doing the courthouse now, but he has done government. So they kind of cross over and stuff. But you got to kind of know your target. And so if it's the Press Democrat you want, then you want to make sure you're reading the paper and keeping track of what people are doing. So that when you do contact a guy and say, hey, Paul, I love this story on that murderer you did. And by the way, let's do a story on saving the world. And, these are all egos, you know. They all want to know, oh, they're reading my stuff. I'm somebody.
Thank you.
The Chronicle lists what their reporters do. The New York Times does. I mean, a lot of them do. And they'll usually say the person's name, and then they'll say, Rudolph Schmidt, and then and it's all at the PD or whatever, but they won't leave the actual email. You have to write it out yourself. So they're not going to get people just copy and send them to everybody. But, yeah, Michael.
I just wanted to add, I think the number 5 here, I think is really important. It's all the way down number 5, but it seems like the core idea of what the news is. Because I think journalists, and Bob will probably attest to it, are fundamentally, there's a lazy aspect to it because you're so swarmed by so much news that you kind of want to be fed, as a journalist, fed, a bit spoon-fed what the story is. And the more you can really bang them over the head, not monkeying around, like it just seems like they would even take a press release as the core of their article if it's done right. Like they wouldn't have to invent what the story is. If you say, we're following up last month's 1,000 person march, which was the 3rd biggest in Northern California, those kinds of statistics or ideas puts it in context for them and gives them more reason to want to. It's not just news. The more background and context you can give them forces them to see that it's a story rather than relying on them to put it together.
Michael's very so right here, but it's a double-edged sword. The media really believes that they are the most honest and objective observers who are key to telling the truth. So oftentimes they'll receive a press release and say, well, it's a goddamn press release. But at the same time, and they'll treat it sometimes with a great deal of suspicion and assumptions and stereotypical ideas about people pushing their own pet project or something. But at the same time, if they're hungry, they feed it to me. Oh, that makes it easy, thanks, good, thanks for the press release. So they'll say, hey, you got anything on that? So it cuts both ways. And it's kind of a rough place to be. You're trying to appeal to the media to pay attention to what you think is important.
I was wondering what happened to the concept of an ombudsman. I know the New York Times used to have that, and when the Judith Miller stuff was going on, there was a guy there that actually I got a hold of and had many long conversations with him. However, when the New York Times was things changed or sold through its different convolutions, it went there for a while. And it seems like that position disappeared.
Ombudsman?
Yeah. And every major newspaper, Washington Post, and it was sort of a mediator. If you were not listening to you, you went to that person and presented your case. And at least it gave you a forum to the editorial board to start looking at some other factors. And of course, some things blew up in the New York Times faced with Judith Miller, for example of that. And then the person no longer worked there. I lost my contact and I never saw a replacement. Is there any historical? Was that just a gratuitous position that was given to these different media outlets, major ones? I'm talking about LA Times.
20 years ago, there was about 120 of them. I bet you there's not even a third that many now. I haven't looked recently. But we used to work, Project Censored used to work with the National Ombudsman Association.
Right,
They actually helped us pick some of the stories, and particularly the junky stories. And we basically quit doing that about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because they were just literally coming apart. So the idea of an ombudsman is someone who's an adversarial, paid to be an adversarial person inside of the newspaper and call them out on their inappropriate behaviors or conflicts of interest or stories written badly. And those are very few. I think the Sacramento Bee still has one. At least last time I checked they did, but I haven't looked.
That's McClatchy now.
Yeah,
I mean, it's always been McClatchy.
it's always been McClatchy, but now it's McClatchy Global.
Now it's
Yeah.
global,
Okay. So part of it, I mean, putting a press release out and/or, you know, to try to get in your local newspaper is one way to do that. But I think more and more as activist groups, that we really need to be engaged in thinking of ourselves that we are the media. And there's a really good book called We Are the Media, which describes a whole lot of that. Because with social media and websites and email, we can reach, our website reaches more people than the PD does. Our Project Censored website, we're getting 400,000 unique views a month. And so there's other strategies to be thinking about. So part of what we handed out was, the 6 steps for a PR campaign. And this kind of feeds into that, because this can include, if you've got an issue that you want to address, not only press releases, but actually writing articles for placement. Now, a lot of these newspapers will accept, especially some of the smaller ones, will accept articles written by other people. Or letters to the editor. And you can get a letter to the editor in the PD, supposedly it's every 3 months, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think they watch it that closely, because I see some of these people are in there all the time. But that's 200 words. But But in 200 words, you can say a whole lot. I mean, but it has to be very specific sentences, and that's probably the easiest way to get your own name in print. And you could have an Occupy group or whatever other groups, environmental. If you have a group of 10 people, you could have one that was a pretty good writer and helped edit, but you could have 10 different people submitting letters to the editor under their names to all the different papers around on a regular basis. And keep your issue, 1% versus 99, letter to the editor, there on a weekly basis. Because there's always new stuff breaking on this stuff. Bank of America was sued by the government. This is another example of how the 1% are ripping us all off. You know, because that was a news story that you can respond to in a letter to the editor very, very quick. And you can likely get in.
Would you submit the same letter to several different papers at the same time?
You can. I will change them. I gave you a sample letter I wrote. Well, this was actually an opinion piece, but they're very similar. It's a lead folly in Sonoma County, so I was making fun of the opening of the Green Music Center and the beaded dresses and all that kind of stuff. This is the one that ran in the Bohemian. So the Bohemian gave me that section where you have to keep it under 400 words. And I did that. But basically, the same letter ran in the PD, but it was 200 words. And then I had an 800-word version that ran in the school newspaper and in our website. So you can take kind of the same content and get it in a variety of places. Yeah.
I think that supper is ready, is that correct?
Yes.
So whenever is a good stopping place, maybe take a few minutes break for us to bring our food back and we can eat while we continue?
Okay, well, let me just finish this part and then we can think about these things or think about strategies. So letters to the editors, setting up interviews, getting on radio and television, these are all very doable kinds of things. Or getting your events announced on radio and television is very important. And what it is developing a relationship with somebody at a radio station that can do this. And you can actually prepare. It's a little bit different writing a public service announcement. They're 30 seconds long or a minute long. And so you're getting down to, I have a little chart here. 30 seconds is about 30 seconds is 60 to 75 words. So, you know, and so you're going to want to get in there, the issue, what's happening, where's the place, you probably want to put in where it's going to be contact information twice inside of that 30 seconds. So it's quick to do. We do PSAs at KPFA all the time. And we will on our Friday show announce events that you guys are doing anytime you want. We're happy to do that. So just, you know, send them to us, to me or Mickey, and we'll put them on. I'm happy to do that. I like to have 3 or 4. We were doing all the Occupy stuff when that was happening. But this idea that you have a public relations campaign, and it's not just PR, but it's a communications strategy that is widespread, encompasses letters, print, radio, find the best person that you have, you know, to be a radio interview, and then promote those points. And don't forget cable access here too. Elaine Holt is great for women's stories. She's always looking for people to be on.
I have a question on this paragraph here about the elite class folly. First of all, great job on that paragraph. You got so much information in there. And we were trying to express this at that time, couldn't get the words. You know, the students were upset by this. So when I see all the facts you brought in, how long did that take you? Did you have a staff that went and looked up like 73.4%?
That got a chuckle.
An average op-ed that I write takes me about a half a day.
So you
And
had
I've
to look
written
in
hundreds.
separate places for the 73.4% of the faculty and the,
Well, some of that we knew. I actually maintain a website that's critical of the administration at the university, so I just put it there. It's, you know, faculty and students for quality, faculty and staff for quality education and associated.
because our students were trying at the time to say something about this and they just didn't have access to the facts the way you did in that paragraph.
Yeah,
They should-
well,
Yeah.
we
Well,
should
just
probably
send
take a
it
break.
this
I
way.
teach a course called investigative research,
Oh.
where students learn how to find the facts.
Oh, yeah, great.
And so I have teams of students who will actually, they did a good Occupy study last year. They actually interviewed about 20 people that were sitting out in the courthouse area in terms of what their main issues were. And so we've done a lot of stuff on immigrant rights, the traffic stops and the stealing of people's cars, and the profits that were made by the tow company. Some of that's changed. But, you know, it's a lot of hours can go into doing even a small bit of research. I had a group that did a comparison study of shopping at Walmart versus other stores. They found out that you can find just as cheap as stuff else everywhere else.
No?
You know, that they're not the cheapest.
And is Costco really better than Walmart? I mean, I don't know.
Well, they pay their staff more.
And some of their things are made in America.
But I think it's time to have something to eat for you.
Yeah, it smells awful good.
Then we, you know, and think about what you might want to do as a strategy, and then let's have a conversation about media strategy. Let's bring Michael in and Bob back here.